Welcome to section 4. This is going to be about communication. And so in order for us to get started, I'd like you to think about one communication challenge that you have. It can be something that's happening at home or something that's happening at work. But pause for a second here, and you can even write on your assessment if you'd like to, on your assessment report or any piece of paper that you have in front of you. Just record one challenge, one communication challenge that you're facing currently. Okay, pause the video and come back when you've got that written down. Okay, now that you have your communications challenge recorded, I want to talk just a few seconds about the leadership model and how it fits with communication. When you think about it as a self-leader, you have to know yourself and know others in order for communication to be able to flow well. So if you want to partner with other people to get results, communication is the channel. It's the lifeblood of how relationships get formed and established and then continue and mature. So communication is critical as a self-leader. When you think about that, second level of leadership is team leadership. In team leadership, you have to develop a cohesive and collaborative team. So now you're looking at how do you communicate with everybody on the team and understanding them, but also how does a team communicate? What are the dynamics of a team and how do you meet everybody's communication preferences as you are managing that team? So healthy conversations that take place individually and within the team environment become critical in being effective as a department in the mission that you're trying to achieve as an organization. And then third, organizationally, communication is important, of course. So as leaders of an organization, it's important that you set clarity, that you help people understand the vision, the mission, each of the goals, to give priority, to be clear about the priorities. All of that we think about as communication clarity. So you want to communicate and inspire people with the vision and the mission that you have, and then keep them on track with the priorities that you set and ensuring that everybody is working together collaboratively on those priorities cross-functionally. So you can see that communication is the bedrock of all levels of leadership, from the self to the team and to the organization. It's time to begin launching the communications piece of this journey. Right, when we think about components of who we are, we are all very complicated, sophisticated, complex people. So I want to make sure that we're all on the same page from the very beginning of this section, section 4, is that each of us in our complexity cannot be stereotyped or put in a box that you're a certain thing and that we can label you as such. In fact, all of us have multi-dimensions, and even within the communication style and within your report, there will be a lot of flexibility and diversity really in how people show up in their communication style. So what we're going to do in this section is look at a model for how we can think about communication. And the model is set up so that we have a way of discerning and differentiating preferences that people have. But it's not to put people in boxes and say, this is what you are. Rather, it's to say, here are some generalizations that we can make about how you communicate based on how you had completed the assessment report. Now, that will make more sense to you as we continue on in this section, but I wanted to up front just make sure that everybody's aware of and cognizant of the difference between saying this is how somebody tends to operate versus putting people in a box and saying this is the way that you are, this is what you are. The first is a good use of the assessment and the second is not. So when we think about in the assessment itself, we're going to be looking at how you come across in your communication and in your problem solving to other people. If you have just completed the DISC communications part of the assessment, that's the report that you have in front of you. If you have completed the full assessment, which we call the Blueprint Leadership Assessment, then you have 4 sections in front of you. I'd like you to open up your report and find the graphic that looks like what you see on your screen. It will be around page 17, 18, 19. It depends based on the type of report that you've taken. But you'll see 2 bar charts. One is your natural style, the other is your adapted style. So pause the video here until you found that page and it looks exactly like what you see on your screen. Now that you have that page opened in front of you, we are going to be looking at the natural graph. So circle that natural graph on your page. So you remember that's what we're going to be looking at. We'll talk about the adapted graph a little bit later, but we're going to be focused on the natural graph. When we think about the DISC, as I said, there's a lot of diversity in the DISC. So I want to first of all say that when we look at the report, there are 4 dimensions, D, I, S, and C. And everybody scores somewhere between 0 and 100 on each one of those dimensions. So if you really think about it, all of those dimensions, 0 to 100 across 4 different elements, is a data point. And all of those 4 data points, wherever you fall in the continuum, create a profile. So there's more than 450 different profiles or narrative explanations of how you might come across to people based on where you fall in each of those dimensions. Again, that's to say that we can't bucket people as all being the same because we have even similarities between what's high and what's low across those 4 dimensions. But what this does do is it helps us to understand how people show up in the world when they're communicating and when they're solving problems. It is important to realize that no matter where you fall on these continuum across the 4 elements, it's all good. Every person is wired to be a particular way in how they communicate. And the best way to be, according to the research, is what you've been designed to be authentic, to not try and be something that you weren't designed to be. And so this assessment is helpful in giving you some narrative about how you were designed to be so that you can continue to optimize those strengths in how you communicate with people and how you solve problems. Now, the real challenge and opportunity really is for all of us to be authentically who we are and give room for other people to be who they are so we can create these win-win relationships and that we can all be our best self in contributing to the mission of the organization. Let's take a look at the bar graph that we were talking about. And again, make sure that you're focused on the natural graph. So first thing I'd like to do is describe to you what each of these elements mean at a high level, and then we will dive deeper into looking at them in more detail. The D measures how people handle problems and challenges. So people who are high in the D, they really welcome debate. They like to have things be straightforward. They're not afraid of people disagreeing. In fact, they welcome it. They see that as a strength. The people who are low in the D are more concerned about making sure that everybody in the room feels safe. And so they will cushion how they present things in a way to create a more safe and nurturing kind of environment. The I measures how people influence. So this is the yellow, the D is a red. I measures how people like to influence. So on the yellow, if you're high, that means that you like to influence through people. If you're low on the yellow influence, then you like to influence through data. The S measures stability, measures how you like pace and how much change you prefer. So people who are high in the S prefer to have steadiness. They want to make sure that they know where are we going? What are each of the steps that we're going to take in order for us to get to our destination? They want to methodically plot out what we're going to do before we get going to make sure that we've thought it through and that we're moving in the right direction. People that are low on the S have a sense of urgency. They feel like, let's just get going. As soon as we get going, we'll find out that we need to adjust, and we'll do that along the way. But why spend so much time up front thinking through where we're going to go? Because we're going to probably change our route in the course of getting there anyway. So let's just start making some movement forward. The C measures how people respond to rules. So people who are very high in C, they like rules and procedures. They like to have checklists. They like to have a measurement system to know if they're accurate or not accurate. They like to analyze data to ensure that they're on the right track. People who are low in the C are people who like the challenge of getting around the rules. You think about somebody like a salesperson who has to figure out where the call point is and move around the system until they can get to the person that they need who will be making a decision. So that would be an example of how you might want to navigate through the system, not necessarily following all the rules, so that you can get in front of the person that you need to in order to represent the organization. So now I'm going to walk you through a much more detailed description of each one of these dimensions. And I'll put up on the screen each one of these so that you can follow along with me. When you think about D, dominance, the descriptors of someone who's high, and especially in the 70 to 100 range of a D, that person is competitive, decisive, direct, results-oriented, self-starter, adventuresome, innovative, persistent. And the value that they bring because of those characteristics and ways of being, ways of showing up, they really like authority. They like to initiate activity. They love efficiency. They're tenacious. They're great problem solvers. They're forward-looking. They're challenge-oriented. So the goal of a D is they love to be challenged and get results. I think about Ds as being like a wild horse. They're at the starting gates, they know where they want to get to, and they are just going to run the best race that they can, oftentimes with blinders to the sides, because they're focused on getting to that goal. And they're excited about and feel challenged by that. The tougher the goal, the more exciting it is, because they love that challenge and they love getting that result. So the need for a D, a high D, is to be challenged, to achieve results, to get something done. The emotion of the D is anger. So Ds will get angry, frustrated, they'll let out their displeasure, let's say, much more easily than any of the other three elements. But the interesting thing about Ds is that they also get it over it very, very quickly. So if you're with a high D, that person may express frustration and then 5 minutes later come back and say, well, let's go for a cup of coffee, because they're comfortable with that emotion. No one else is. The I, S's, and C's get intimidated by that, but the D's are very comfortable with expressing their frustration. Now, the fear of a D is being taken advantage of. So a D wants to make sure that there's at least a win-win. They're not at all interested in a win-lose, where they're the loser. So if you're working with a high D, you want to make sure that you're always keeping them aware that you're on their side and that you're there to make sure that they have success and they're going to get the results that they're looking for, so that you're a partner in ensuring that there's a win for everyone, a win for the high D as well. Now, thinking about the ideal environment for a high D, these are people who want to have freedom. They don't like to be micromanaged. They want to have the freedom to lead and take initiative and be proactive, and go after challenges. They love to be innovative and futuristic in how they think about things. They like to have power and authority to get things done. They don't want to have long conversations. They would prefer to have things be very direct, bullet point kinds of conversations that get things done quickly. And the other thing about high Ds is they really are looking for opportunities to advance, because leadership is important to a high D. For each one of the dimensions, we're also going to look at what can get you in trouble. And I call this the flat side of our strengths. So while we want to really lean into the strengths, it's important to be aware of where these strengths can be overused or in a stress reaction come out in ways that are not becoming to us and not helpful to the team. For a high D, the stress challenges, meaning when the environment is very stressful, what might come out of a high D is a sense of being demanding, aggressive, and egotistical. So they are pushing to get things done, and they feel a sense of confidence that their way of doing it is correct. And so the confidence that they bring as a strength can, when overused in under stressful situations, come across in a way that isn't becoming. And these words are typical words that describe high Ds under stress as interpreted by the I, S, and C. So limitations that the high D ought to be aware of includes sometimes setting standards too high, because Ds love challenge and getting results. The rest of the dimensions, I, S, and C, are going to feel more stressed rather than energized by really high standards that seem unachievable. So Ds need to do a good job of ensuring that people feel like they're on board with the goals, that they're achievable goals, and that the mission is inspiring so that other people want to get on the boat with you in accomplishing those goals. So again, as we said, the D is looking for challenge, and in that challenge then, they put on those blinders and start down the road to achieving that goal. So they can come across as being pushy, aggressive, impatient in trying to achieve the goal. The intent is good, but the manner of going about it can be perceived as being somewhat negative, especially under stressful situations. So the ways that high Ds can improve are three. First, slow down. Make sure that your team is on board with you and the challenges that you've set before them. Second, ask more questions. Instead of being very directive and telling people what they should and shouldn't do, ask questions to engage people in the journey that you're on. And third, display more patience. You're running at 1,000,000 miles an hour, but make sure that your team is running with you in order for you to be most successful in accomplishing your goals. Let's talk about the high Is. So I is about influence, and remember, high Is like to influence through people. Some of the descriptors of a high I are charming, enthusiastic, optimistic, sociable, persuasive, popular, trusting, inspiring. Those are really fun kind of attributes about how the high I is able to bring energy into the room, energy into the team. The value that they bring is just that. They're optimistic, they're enthusiastic, they are creative about how they solve problems. They like to motivate and inspire everyone else around them. They are able to negotiate conflict, and they do care about ensuring that everybody in the room has an opportunity to participate. They are very articulate. They're very good at messaging and standing up in front of people and being promoters because they've learned how to articulate well. And they're just plain entertaining and fun. I always think that if you're going to go out for dinner, for example, it's great to have a high I plan the dinner, because they're not just going to make sure that people eat. They're not just going to make sure that people can meet at a place that's convenient for everyone. They're the ones that create a theme and bring the cards and all kinds of extras to make sure that the environment is fun and uplifting and just really values people and creates enthusiasm and optimism in the room. It's a great attribute to have on the team also. The goal for a high I is just about that. It's about social recognition, but also about creating an experience for everybody. The need for an I is to interact. So the last thing you want to do is put a high I behind a computer and have them, processing data 8 hours a day. The high I is best when they're out with people, brainstorming, bouncing ideas off each other, and having an opportunity to be creative. The fear of an I is not belonging. So if you have a high I that reports to you, one of the things you'll want to pay attention to is making sure that that person feels like they belong on the team, that they're accepted, that you're recognizing their talents, and that you're supportive of them and their part in the team. Right, so the ideal environment for a high I, like the Ds, they are people who don't like to be micromanaged, don't like to be constrained. They like to have people contact. They want to have relationships that are democratic, meaning that people are all considered equals and everybody has a chance to express themselves. They don't like to be controlled. They don't like to have a lot of detail orientation. They like to have freedom of movement, freedom of expression. They like to have a forum where ideas can be shared, as I've said. They like to have an opportunity for social recognition. So these would be the people who would most appreciate recognition in public. There are other people who would not, but high Is actually appreciate being recognized for the work that they've done. And then they love to have group participation. Like I said, the brainstorming, creative ideas, being able to bounce things off of others in order for them to get their creative juices going. Just like we talked about with the Ds, high Is have some attributes to be aware of. So under stress, the very strengths of a person can become the underbelly or flat side. So a couple of things for Is to be aware of. Is, when you're under stress, you can come across as being very self-promoting, overly optimistic, gabby. So all the things that make you great in your strengths, overused, become this flat side. The stress tendencies for an I include being self-promoting, overly optimistic, and gabby. So you can see that these are strengths overused. When people are stressed out, high Is get stressed out, they'll talk more about themselves and they'll talk just more. And these things then come across as being self-promoting or too talkative or overwhelming to some of the other people, the Ds, S's, and C's. So you can think about it as almost when you're stressed out in a high I, it's almost like a tsunami comes out of all of this emotion and emoting and verbalization. It becomes too much for the people in the other elements. The possible limitations for an I is inattention to detail, and again, it's because the high I is thinking about people, not necessarily about all the tasks at hand, and so detail can get away from them. They can come across as being overly optimistic, and most of the high Is I talk to say, yeah, people tell me all the time, I have rose-colored glasses on. So that's a sense of being overly optimistic, looking at the world through these rose-colored glasses. The other thing I hear from Is a lot, high Is, is that they trust indiscriminately. And so they get their toes stepped on quite often because they'll just trust without people necessarily gaining merit of that trust. And high Is almost always just nod at me and say, yes, Diane, that's so true. That happens to me all the time. And then finally, high Is can be situational listeners. High Is are very articulate, and they're used to being the center of attention and really, creating the party and the optimism and the fun everywhere that they go. They're not always looking for, how can I be a listener, because they're more focused on how can I create fun for people around me. Okay, Is, ways to improve. One is be a better listener. Really set out to ensure that, when you're having a conversation one-on-one with people, that you're not speaking 80% of the time, but that you're also listening. Second, be a little bit better at organization. Look for ways that you can organize your workspace and organize your milestones to make sure that you're staying on top of things. And then finally, ask questions and gather information to get more specific. High Is love to dream and love to have creativity come flowing through and think about what's possible. And sometimes it's important to also dive a little bit deeper into the detail so that you can look at things from a more, what other people would say, realistic perspective, by identifying what are the pieces of information I need in order for me to achieve this wild dream that I have. So it's not that the dream is impossible, but with the detail behind it to be able to implement, that's where you're going to see those dreams come true. S's. Well, the descriptors of an S include being sincere, steady, group player, good listener, understanding, amiable, friendly, patient, relaxed, and stable. I think of S's as being, the salt of the earth. The value that S's bring to the group are being dependable and consistent, patient and empathetic, logical and methodical, steady, stable, and loyal, good listeners, peacemakers, calms people and teams, and service-oriented. The goal for a high S is actually stability. They like to have stability in all forms. They like to have harmony within the team. They like to have stability in not making sudden changes. They don't like change for change's sake. They want to understand why change is happening and then be thoughtful about implementation of change. They like to know where they're going to go. If you're going on vacation, where are we going and how are we going to get there? So everything about a high S is about creating consistency and stability in the environment. The need that a high S has is to serve. So they're always looking for how can I make a contribution in serving the needs of others. It's a very selfless kind of communication and problem-solving style. The fear of an S is loss of security. So if you have a high S on your team, you want to make sure that they know that their job is secure, that their relationships within the team are secure, and that the organization is going to be around, that there aren't going to be layoffs or those kinds of things. So as I've worked with companies over the years, when a layoff or a merger or any kind of change like that, a sudden change especially, is coming about, the high S's will react the most powerfully to those changes. They don't like to have sudden change implemented and put on them. If they can work through it and be part of that decision, it's much easier for them than having a change that just bombards them. So what's the ideal environment for a high S? Well, they want to have a stable and predictable environment with a predictable future, credit for work that's accomplished, and I will say with this is S's serve, serve, serve. And oftentimes they get overlooked because they don't raise their hand often and say, look what I did. But, it's in their nature to serve. So if you have a high S that's reporting to you, it's very important for you to recognize the work that they're doing. And they don't necessarily need to be recognized in front of a team, but for you, in a one-on-one meeting, more informal and a more intimate setting, to be able to recognize the high S's contribution goes a long way. S's also appreciate a sincere environment. They don't like a lot of hype or spin. They want to have authenticity and a sense of sincerity between people. They like to have an environment that allows for time to change. We said that. Long-term work relationships. Again, that stability of relationships. They prefer to have harmony, not to have conflict. So in this way, they're the opposites of S's. They want to ensure that everybody in the team is getting along. And if they're not, that's upsetting to a high S. Whereas the D is actually looking for that kind of debate and tension because they believe that it's going to get a better result. So there's two different styles, two different ways of operating in communication and problem solving. And then finally, The high S's are the people who they like to have balance, they like to have harmony, they care about relationships, and so as a result, they also care about making sure that their family life is taken care of. So high S's will want to will put more emphasis on ensuring that there's also work-life balance so that they're giving into their families as well as into their work and their career. For a high S, the stress tendencies that they have tend to be inflexible, hesitant, and resistant. So what happens here is high S's think about things carefully before they make a decision. So once they've made a decision, they're going to come across as being resistant to change. They're going to get their, they're going to dig in their heels on certain things because they put a lot of thought and effort into coming to the conclusion that they've come to. So high S's will be perceived by D's, I's, and even C's as being resistant to change, resistant to new ideas, stubborn about the opinions that they have. The limitations that S's have really stems from that desire to have harmony and stability. So they will tend to refrain from conflict because they don't want to have that tension. Sometimes they'll refrain from communicating their ideas. They aren't the kind of people that are going to fight for airspace. So if other people are monopolizing the conversation, a high S is not going to compete for airtime. They're going to step back and let other people take the floor. S's can seem like they're indecisive because they like to evaluate all kinds of information and think about things thoroughly before they make a decision. And finally, S's are hesitant to implement changes because they're thinking far out. What is the mission? What are all the steps that we need to take? And then they're thinking through all those steps that need to happen before they're ready to go. And that will appear to everyone else as being hesitant to get going. S's, the way for you to improve. First of all, make sure that you're doing everything you can to be assertive. There are going to be times where you're going to just have to oomph your way up and take the floor. You are going to sometimes have to make the effort to interrupt the conversations that are taking place so that your views can be heard, so that you can contribute to the longer term goals of the organization. So S's, you have thought things through. You have ideas. Your thought process and your experience and everything else that you bring to the table is just as important as the people who have an easier time articulating and stepping forward, taking the lead. So S's, it's incumbent upon you to make sure that when you have an idea or a contribution to make, that you're more assertive about making sure that you take some airtime and get those messages out there. S's, it will be helpful to the team if you would discern where risk is low and then just let those initiatives go forward. If it isn't a big mountain that you need to climb, it isn't an important risk that will jeopardize the future of the organization or the future of a goal, a future of the team, just let people move forward and not pull them back on all change that's taking place. Withhold your reservations for the high risk kinds of changes that are happening so that then you will have more credibility when you're challenging the moves forward. Finally, S's, because you are the salt of the earth and you really do love to serve, your heart is one of serving. Make sure that you have the right boundaries in place so that you don't get taken advantage of. Finally, our high C's. The descriptors for a C include analytical, precise, high standards, conscientious, courteous, diplomatic, fact finder, mature, patient, and accurate. The value that C's bring to a team are they really have high standards and they want to make sure that those standards are adhered to. Very finely developed analytical skills as well. They are comprehensive problem solvers. They're diplomatic in how they communicate, very detail oriented. They tend to ask the right questions, and they are the anchor of reality. The goal for a high C is quality. They are always looking for the highest standards of performance, and they hold themselves as well as everyone else to that standard. Their need is to comply with that high standard of quality and to have everyone around them do the same. The key emotion of a C is fear. Let me explain what that means. So a high C is always looking out at the world, saying what can go wrong. And their intent then is to fix that thing that could go wrong before it happens. So they're very proactive in looking for problems that can be solved so that there aren't problems. And the fear that they have is criticism of their work. As you can see, everything about a C is accuracy and standards of performance, high quality. So when they look at their work, they see their work as a reflection of themselves. And if somebody criticizes their work, it's criticizing them personally. C's take that a lot more personally than any of the other elements, the D, the I, or the S. So it's very important, if you have a high C reporting to you, that you walk a little bit more delicately in giving feedback to a high C. They're already going to be looking at what they did wrong. They're already going to be hard on themselves. And so they don't need a supervisor or manager to come behind them and add to that pressure that they're already putting on themselves. Let's look at the ideal environment for a C. Of course, they like to have value and accuracy. So it's important for them to work in an environment where other people appreciate those same attributes. They tend to be a little bit more reserved and businesslike. They prefer to have a quiet space or their own office so that they have privacy and space to work without interruption. They tend to be technical in nature, so they'll develop an area of expertise and then flourish in that. They like to have control over their work, to know if they're being successful or not successful. So it's important for them to be able to have clarity from their manager about what's expected, what's the standard of performance, and how are they measuring up to that. And finally, C's are the ones that are oftentimes asking why. If you hear somebody in a meeting saying, well, why this or why that? It's typically a person with a high C, and they need to have an environment where they can ask those questions. They're looking for details that will help them to be able to make good decisions. Okay, C's, you have your flat side as well. So let's look at your stress tendencies. The more the environment is chaotic and you're feeling stressed, the more that you are going to come across as pessimistic and critical of what's going on in the organization. People will perceive you as being inflexible and slow to make movement. Again, you already have a high level of need for accuracy and quality. And so when the environment is stressful, that stress will push you along to be even more analytical and even more careful about decisions that you're making. And so you'll be perceived by other people to have those tendencies we just discussed. C's, your possible limitations. First of all, you want to make sure that you are not getting defensive if somebody is giving you feedback. They don't mean it personally. So your sense of quality and your sense of accuracy is admirable, but make room for people to be able to help you to grow and to develop even better skills by creating an environment that welcomes feedback. Also, because C's have a tendency to really check into the details and dig deep, sometimes that can come across as being too bogged down in details. You know, you hear the term analysis of paralysis, not being able to step back and see the bigger picture, but getting, really bogged down into the weeds, which creates a sense of slow movement and can be frustrating to other members of the team. Finally, C's, just be careful about the intensity that you have. You care a lot about making sure that things are right, but there needs to be in a work environment a little bit of playfulness at times. So just lighten the mood whenever you can, and come out of your office and interact and intermingle with people a little bit to develop those relationships that make it easier then to have good communication and open the flow of conversation between people, because there's a sense of connection between you and everyone else on the team. Okay, ways to improve. C's, First, make sure that you're aware of not taking that feedback so personally. Second, it's always helpful to get away from the work. After an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours, make sure you're getting a walk or going to lunch and step away from the detail to be able to see the bigger picture. And then third, make sure that you are creating an environment within your team that allows for creativity. There are going to be times where people have those, rose-colored glasses and optimism and challenge-oriented, and for you just to be able to say, okay, I'm going to roll with that. I don't have to challenge how it's going to be done. In the very beginning stages, I can let people dream for a while, and then later on in the process, come back and start to question how we're going to make that happen. How are we going to accomplish those goals?